boys and girls. My name's Sarah Farrell, and I'm the art teacher at Jarretttown Elementary School, which is right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The project I'm going to be sharing with you today is a drawing and painting of a koi fish, which is a big, beautiful fish that comes from Asia in countries like China and Japan. But a lot of times you'll see them here in the United States inside fish ponds or in big fish tanks. Now, people love koi fish because they come in so many different patterns and beautiful colors, which is going to make them a really fun subject for us to have in our pictures. Now, to do this project, we're going to need to collect a couple materials. First off, you're going to need just some plain white paper. Now, for this project, I'm going to be using a square that's 12 inches by 12 inches. And then I'm going to be drawing a circle to give me the shape of my final project. You could do this in any shape that you want. You could use a rectangle, you could use a circle like me, or you could use a square. It's up to you. Besides the paper, you're also going to need just a regular pencil and an eraser to do your drawing. And then I'm also going to be using a permanent black marker to trace my drawing, but you could also do this step with just a black crayon if you don't have a permanent marker. We're also going to need some regular crayons. I have a nice pack of 24 here, so I'm going to have lots of beautiful colors to work with. And then lastly, to paint the water of our picture, I'm going to be using liquid watercolor. Now, you could definitely go to the art store and buy some liquid watercolor, but it's really fun to actually make your own too. Now, you can imagine as an art teacher, we use tons and tons of markers in my classroom, and making your own liquid watercolor paint is a great way to recycle your used up markers. All you need to do is take a container. I'm going to be using a jar, but you could use like a regular cup or anything with a little bit of water at the bottom. I have maybe about an inch or two of water in the bottom of my jar, and then you're going to take the lids off of your markers and just stick them into the water. It doesn't even matter if the markers were already dried up. Like, these were some ones that didn't have the lid on them, so you can't even color with them anymore. Why not make paint? And now you can already see the water in the jar is starting to start to change to the color blue. Now, I could play around with this. I've got a turquoise one in here. I could put some purples in here to make some different shades. But whatever colors you choose, you're gonna wanna let this sit for about 24 hours to give the pigment inside the markers a chance to run out and go into the paint. Here's one I actually made yesterday, and this is the one that I'm going to be using later on when I work on my project. And you can see how nice and dark and rich. This is kind of a greenish blue color, which is going to be perfect for looking like water in my picture. Making liquid watercolor paints is something you can do in any shade. I like using these jars because then I can just stick the lid right on top and open it up whenever I'm ready. And the best part is it cost me $0 because I'm using things that would have just ended up in the trash anyway. Okay. Besides my liquid watercolor paint that I'm making, I also have my paintbrush and I have some paper towels. And it's always a great idea when you're working with paint to put something down on the table to protect it in case things get a little messy. All right, once you've gathered all these things, now you're ready to start. So let me show you what we're gonna do.
So I had mentioned that I like to do this picture inside the shape of a circle. So I'm going to begin by sketching out a circle on my square paper. You can definitely find something round around your house to trace, or ask an adult to help you if you're having trouble with this step. Next, I'm going to start sketching out the shape of my koi fish. This case, I'm going to use a U for the head and then a little dot to help me connect my head back to where the tail is going to be. One line, 2 lines for the tail, and then I can connect these lines with all different shapes. A zigzag, kind of a bump, or like this wavy line would all work. So for this example, I'm actually going to do this wavy line. Then for the fins, I'm going to use similar straight lines and then the wavy line to connect it back to the body on either side of the fish. Then to create the face of the koi fish, I'm going to be using a lot of U shapes, including 2 U's here, a larger and then a smaller one for the eye, and we'll color in the small one to be the pupil. And then another U for the mouth, including these long whisker shapes on either side. Now, I mentioned earlier that koi fish come in all different patterns, so you can design the body and the patterns and the textures on your fish any way you want. In this case, I'm repeating some U shapes to make scales, and then I'll do some stripes down here. And then I'm going to add a couple lines in his fins and his tail to add a little bit of texture and interest. Then once my fish is done, I'm going to work on filling in some of these spaces around my fish. This is one reason I like working on a circle, because you can create little seaweed or rocks, or if this is in a fish tank, I could put like a castle or a treasure chest all the way around the perimeter of the circle to kind of make it look like we are looking down into the tank or into the pond onto our little fish guy swimming by. Once I've decided that I have enough details in my picture, I'm going to use the permanent black marker to trace over all of these pencil lines, which is just going to help them stand out when I go to add the crayon and the paint. If you don't have a permanent marker, remember that using a black crayon is going to pretty much do the same thing, as long as you press kind of hard when you're tracing to give you a nice, thick, bold, dark black line. We don't want to use regular markers for this step, because when we go to add the paint, it's going to make the black lines bleed and run, and it's going to mess up our picture. Then once I'm done tracing all of my lines and details with the black marker, I'm going to take my eraser and kind of clean up any extra pencil lines that might be poking through, just to make it look nice and neat before we add the other colors. Now we're ready to start adding the color to our picture, and I'm just going to be using regular old crayons, which are actually one of my favorite things to color with. There's a lot of different techniques that you might want to try while you're coloring in your fish, including changing the pressure as you're coloring to make light and dark areas of color, like I'm doing here on these fins. I'm pressing darker on the outside and then a little bit lighter on the inside when I color it in. On the fins and the tail, I'm going to overlap the crayon, so I color with purple, and then when I add the red next to it on the tip of the tail, I make sure that I color over the purple a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing here with the seaweed, using a dark green and this yellowish light green on the same different stalk of seaweed. Finally, on these rocks, I'm going to switch up the pressure, going from pressing the hardest, a little bit lighter, and then finally the lightest, to give me different shades of the same color. As a last step, when I'm done coloring in all of the elements that I drew in my picture, I'm going to just take a couple different shades of blue crayon, and go around some of this negative space where I'm eventually going to be adding paint. One fun thing to try is to use a white crayon, pressing kind of hard while you're drawing, and you can really add a lot of scribbles and squiggles all over the place. You're not going to be able to really see them very well right now, but trust me, when we put the liquid watercolor over the top, these are going to make the water look really cool. Finally, as my last step, I'm ready to add the liquid watercolor paint that I made from the dried up markers. Now, a lot of times when I paint, I have to be careful not to get on top of my drawing, but the nice thing about using crayons is that you can just go right over top of the colored areas and the paint is not going to stick. This is what we call a crayon resist, because the wax is not allowing the colored water to stick to the paper. And you can definitely see all of those white squiggly lines that I had drawn before are showing up in my water and adding a really cool ripply texture to it.
So I hope you enjoyed learning how to make your own koi fish drawing and painting. Now in our pictures, we really focused on just making the fish, but feel free to add any underwater animals that you want. It would look really cool if you had little frogs or crabs or whatever crawling around inside your underwater world. Have fun with it. Until next time though, this is Sarah Farrell saying happy art making, thank you, and see you next time.